Hey, it's Steve. You ever fall in love with a rifle? I mean, absolutely head over heels fall in love with a rifle. Everybody's got their favorite. And believe it or not, my favorite is an ugly duckling. Not only is it an ugly duckling, but it was a cheap ugly duckling. And I got two of them. A long time ago, I worked in a gun shop. Sold people all kinds of guns, put scopes on guns, whatever. Did a lot of stuff. There were people that came in and bought the most expensive rifle they could afford. There were people that came in and bought the most powerful rifle they could afford. And there were those people that bought the cheapest rifle because they couldn't afford an expensive rifle. Now, it wasn't everybody that bought this rifle. It was made for a long time. And when I reveal what it's going to be, a lot of you are probably going to have to think a little before you remember it. And it's not that long ago. It was about 30 years ago when I worked in that gun shop. Here I am, sitting in a gun shop, looking at this rifle. It was a single shot rifle. No, it wasn't a Ruger number 1. It was kind of ugly, but kind of cute at the same time. What was it? It was those old Harrington and Richardson single shot handy rifles. And I really didn't think much about them after I left doing that until I was at an auction one day. Now, in the back of my mind, I had talked to people after they bought the handy rifles, and they said, you know what, they shoot pretty good. So at least I had a little knowledge of them. I was at an auction. One of the lots at the auction were 2 handy rifles and 3 barrels. Nobody was interested in them. I bid on them. I got 2 handy rifles with 4 barrels and promptly sold the 2 barrels that I really wasn't much interested in. One was a 7mm Remington barrel. The other barrel, it was a .243. Really thought about keeping the .243 because I didn't own one at the time, but I sold the barrel anyhow. Got pretty close to what I paid for everything. Didn't really expect a whole lot out of these rifles. Matter of fact, they sat for 4 or 5 years before I even put a scope on them and shot them. Well, I was impressed. Now, it wasn't like I was shooting 3/4 of an inch groups at 100 yards, okay? It's not that kind of rifle. But 1 1/4 inches at 100 yards with a .308, definitely not bad. Now, the other rifle, I've got some history with. That's right. The other one is a .45-70. Now, picture yourself shooting this really light .45-70. You would expect it to knock your shoulder off. In reality, it didn't. The other thing was that I was surprised at was, the triggers on these rifles were not bad. And again, I was able to shoot 1.25 inch, 1.5 inch size groups at 100 yards with this .45-70. Now, I always wanted a .45-70. I had never owned one. But this .45-70 was about to become a very important rifle for the most unexpected circumstances you could ever come up with. You see, I lived on a farm, small farm in New Jersey. We had a rifle range and stuff set up so I could shoot whenever I wanted to. We also had cattle. Well, one day I went to walk out on my front porch, and there was a dairy bull. It was kind of a mix with Black Angus and something else. It was more dairy cattle than anything else. But His name was Chuck, and Chuck was looking at me through the front window of my house. Well, Chuck was a little aggressive. So I grabbed my 45-70. I said to myself, I got to be able to defend myself in case this thing's going to run me over. I had no intention of shooting it. Well, I stepped out of the house, and Chuck went running for the highway. That's right, the highway. He was about 80 yards from the highway, headed right to it at a dead run. Fortunately, I was at a decent angle where I didn't have to shoot directly at the highway. And I decided that, well, today's Chuck's day to die. So I shot Chuck. That's right. I shot Chuck with a 45-70 at a dead run. Chuck went another 25 yards or so, and Chuck fell over, dead. I was pretty impressed with the 45-70 at that point. Of course, my son lived in the other house. He came running out to see what the gunshot was because it wasn't anywhere near hunting season. And there was Chuck in his driveway, dead. It took him about a second and a half to figure out why Chuck was dead. And he said, "Dad, what'd you shoot him with?" I said, "I just shot him with my 45-70. He says to me, "Well, if you were going to shoot a buffalo rifle, you might as well shoot something the size of a buffalo." But getting back to the whole handy rifle story, they were cheap rifles. They weren't bad, and they didn't shoot bad. And you know what? They're some of my favorite guns to shoot because they're fun. Till next time, I'm Steve.